Hi, I'm a lady who works as a cook. I recently got married, and I'm really enjoying being a newlywed. I usually keep my past to myself and don't talk much about it. I don't have many friends, but I tell people I grew up like any other kid, even though it wasn't that simple. I had a tough childhood, but I was lucky to have my grandpa who loved me a lot. He was like my only family because I didn't have parents around. My grandpa worked hard, sometimes at construction sites or collecting and selling things like paper or fruits and veggies. I don't have baby photos because we couldn't afford them, but when I turned 6, my grandpa made sure I had a picture taken every year on my birthday to capture my growth. I didn't go to kindergarten, but my grandpa taught me basics like the alphabet and numbers. My grandpa didn't have much money, but he was well respected in our neighborhood. The neighbors would pitch in to help take care of me because they knew my grandpa was working hard to raise me. This meant I got to have warm meals and play with the older kids in the neighborhood, who taught me a lot of things. When my grandpa finished work, he'd come get me. Our house was small and old, with just one bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It could get pretty uncomfortable in the extremes of weather, but we managed okay. In the summer, my grandpa fixed up an old fan he found, and in the winter, he washed and reused old blankets to keep me warm. He did everything he could to take care of me, even though we didn't have much. Our neighbors were also struggling, but they still helped us a lot. They came to school with me on my first day, took turns attending parent-teacher meetings at my grandpa's request, and even packed food for my school trips as a way to say thank you for his hard work. My grandpa was a handyman who could fix just about anything around the house. In our friendly neighborhood, people helped each other out with their skills, but gossip still circulated. Some folks couldn't help but wonder why my grandpa was raising me alone in such tough circumstances. He never really talked about my parents when I was growing up. Whenever I asked, he'd just say they had passed away soon after I was born and were now in heaven. When I was younger, I thought they had died from some serious illness like cancer. But as I got older, I started hearing different stories, mainly from the women in the neighborhood. They'd whisper about how my grandpa had never been married and how nobody had ever seen my mom or dad. It was confusing because my grandpa had always told me they were my real parents. And if I had parents, shouldn't I have had a grandma too? It didn't add up. As I listened to her, I realized something strange. We didn't have any family photos of my parents, not even one of my grandma. Our photo album only contained pictures that my grandpa insisted we take every year, along with some snapshots our neighbors had taken of us. When I reached middle school and started going through puberty, I began to rebel a bit, questioning my identity more and more. Living only with my grandpa made it even harder. I had so many questions about my parents, and by ninth grade, I couldn't hold them in any longer. I sat my grandpa down and bombarded him with questions, desperate for answers about where my mom and dad were, whether they were alive or dead, and why there were no photos of them or my grandma. I felt like I was interrogating him like a criminal, but I needed to know. As I got emotional and started crying, my grandpa just held me close and reassured me. He explained that my parents couldn't raise me, so they left me with him when I was a baby, hoping to come back for me someday. He showed me a small bracelet they had left behind, saying it was with me when I was born in the hospital. Seeing that bracelet, some of my curiosity eased. Even though I learned that my parents had abandoned me, knowing that my grandpa loved me and raised me with care was enough. From that day on, I started to find some peace within myself. I began to see a way out of the challenges of puberty. College wasn't an option for me due to our financial situation, and I didn't want to add to my grandpa's burdens, so I made up my mind about my career before even starting high school. "Grandpa," I said, "I want to be a cook. I plan to take career classes during my senior year, earn my cooking license, and find a job right after graduation." My grandpa asked if I was sure I didn't want to go to college, offering to do whatever it took to save up for tuition. I reassured him that cooking was my passion and that I wanted to set things up so he wouldn't feel guilty about it. True to my word, once I reached my senior year of high school, I dove into cooking classes and earned several licenses. I secured a job a month before graduation and received my first paycheck just a week after. With it, I bought some steak to celebrate, though I couldn't afford to dine out. Back home, I surprised my grandpa with the steak and handed him an envelope containing some of my earnings. "This is for you, Grandpa," I said. "It's what's left after buying the steaks." My grandpa was speechless. "Patty," he finally said, "I can't accept this. You worked hard for this money. You should use it for yourself. I can't possibly take it." He insisted, pushing the envelope back toward me. "Grandpa, if you don't take it, I'll leave home. Why should you be the only one doing things for me? I really wanted to give you this money," I threatened, feeling a surge of frustration. Eventually, my grandpa relented, tears welling up as he accepted the envelope. He tucked it into a book he enjoyed reading. Sharing that steak meal in the place I'd always called home felt incredibly special. For the first time in my life, I felt proud to do something for my grandpa. We chatted happily as we ate, until a knock interrupted us. Who could be knocking at this hour? My grandpa wondered aloud as I went to answer the door. To our surprise, 2 police officers stood there. "Is Richard O'Leary here?" they asked, and I confirmed that he was my grandpa. "And you must be Patty Rowland?" they inquired, and I affirmed that too. "Both of you need to come with us to the police station," they stated matter-of-factly. When I asked why, they informed us, "Mr. O'Leary is being accused of kidnapping a child. You both need to come with us." I was stunned. Kidnapping? I couldn't fathom why my grandpa was being accused of such a heinous crime. I protested that he wasn't that kind of person, but the police insisted we accompany them. That night, my grandpa and I found ourselves in a police car headed to the station. Despite the gravity of the situation, my grandpa remained oddly calm. We waited in a designated area until eventually the police returned with some other individuals accompanying them. A woman in her 50s entered the room, accompanied by a couple holding hands. She approached us, pointing accusingly at my grandpa. "That's him. He's the one who kidnapped the president's daughter." She exclaimed loudly, shocked and confused. I demanded answers. "What do you mean? Who did my grandpa supposedly kidnap?" I shouted back at her. The police intervened, trying to calm both the woman and me down. Behind the shouting woman, the couple stepped forward, and the woman addressed me with tears in her eyes. "Are you Patty?" she asked, and I awkwardly nodded in response. Suddenly, she embraced me and burst into tears. "Patty, it's Mom. I'm your mother." Her words hit me like a bolt from the blue. I was stunned and bewildered, but my grandpa's composed demeanor added to my confusion. He stood up calmly and addressed her. "So, you've finally returned. Only now. Are you okay?" The woman in her 50s scoffed, accusing my grandpa of kidnapping. I vehemently protested his innocence, while the couple watched on, clearly perplexed. The woman in her 50s went on to explain that a couple had visited her orphanage, claiming they had left their baby there and had now returned to reclaim their child. They left behind a letter stating their intention to return for the child, along with hospital paperwork. I was about 3 or 4 at the time. However, despite searching through records and adoption papers, we found nothing about the child. Then, a distant memory surfaced. There was a child who went missing years ago, causing a major commotion. Despite reporting to the police and filing missing child reports, she was never found. I recalled an old man who used to work at the orphanage abruptly quitting around that time. He had been overly attentive to the children, and I had considered firing him before he vanished. Could he have been involved in kidnapping a child from the orphanage, leaving behind a distraught woman? We underwent DNA testing as my grandpa calmly observed the couple. He asked the police, "Are they truly Patty's parents?" The police insisted we wait for the results. Then, my grandpa pleaded with the officers, offering to stay in jail if necessary, but asking for the chance to tell his side of the story. Grasping the officer's hands, he began to speak. The police acknowledged his right to defend himself. Grandpa agreed to share his story once the DNA confirmed the couple's parentage. Reluctantly, the police consulted the couple, who agreed to the arrangement if it meant hearing the truth. While awaiting the DNA results, my grandpa remained at home under recognizance, and I continued my routine going to and from work. 2 days later, the DNA results came in, showing a 99.99% match. After 20 years, I finally met my parents. Hearing the news, I was overcome with a strange mix of emotions. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, but my parents embraced me, soothing my sobs. The orphanage director glared at my grandpa with fury, as if she could kill him on the spot. "Now you must arrest this old man for kidnapping. Were you planning to ruin my establishment?" She raged, her anger palpable. True to his word, my grandpa began his tale, producing a stack of papers from home and presenting them to the police one by one. "It's true that I worked as a janitor at the orphanage, not far from where I live now," he began. "One morning, I arrived early to find a young child sleeping outside the orphanage, curled up in a ball. I assumed she had been abandoned by her parents. Concerned for her well-being, I tried to bring her inside, but she woke up and, with her black eyes, called me Grandpa." Grandpa continued, explaining how the child handed him a bag containing a doll, paperwork, and a letter promising to return for their daughter. "I took her into the orphanage, where she began to live," he recounted. "While cleaning, I often saw the child, but she always seemed to have a dark expression. It wasn't until about a month later that I discovered the reason. The woman was abusing her, especially when the orphanage faced financial strain due to overcrowding. Another child had arrived, and she took out her frustration on this poor girl." Grandpa described how the child was forced to do arduous chores, her hands red and bleeding from the harsh treatment. "I confronted the director multiple times, urging her to stop mistreating the child," he continued. "But instead of listening, she fired me. As I was leaving, I couldn't bear to see the child so unhappy. That's why I did what I did," my grandpa explained, his voice tinged with remorse. He recounted how he had taken me in after witnessing the neglect and abuse I suffered under the orphanage director's care. "The director didn't even bother to read the documents in the bag," he continued, "neglecting her duties and subjecting me to abuse. That's why I took Patty in, to protect her and raise her as my own granddaughter." After his revelation, the police and I were left in a state of uncertainty. The orphanage director, however, remained defiant, accusing my grandpa of fabricating stories to tarnish her reputation. "I'll sue you for slander," she threatened, her voice dripping with venom. The police pressed my grandpa for evidence to support his claims. With confidence, he mentioned a former employee, Mrs. Cumberland, who could attest to the abuse. While we awaited Mrs. Cumberland's testimony, I was speechless, grappling with the truth unfolding before me. In the late afternoon, Mrs. Cumberland arrived at the police station, armed with photographs she had taken of my injured hands and other signs of abuse. My parents, upon seeing the evidence, were overcome with emotion. The undeniable proof left the orphanage director cornered, and my parents wasted no time in announcing their intention to sue her for her crimes. Despite her pleas for forgiveness, she was arrested and charged with child abuse. That night, my grandpa and I returned home, the weight of the day's revelations heavy on our minds. From my parents, I learned the heartbreaking truth. They had left me at the orphanage due to financial hardship, hoping to reclaim me once they were stable. When they finally returned, they discovered I was missing and unregistered. Only recently did they learn of the possibility that my grandpa had taken me in. Although their actions couldn't be excused, my parents found solace in the fact that they had finally found me after years of searching. They faced repercussions for abandoning me, but now they sought to alleviate their guilt. I harbored no resentment toward my parents. I was simply eager and anxious to finally meet them. Nor did I hold any blame toward my grandpa, who had saved me and showered me with love and care during my time with him. His unwavering support was the reason I couldn't hate my parents. I assured them that I understood their circumstances and expressed gratitude for their efforts to find me. As my mom hugged me, tears streaming down her face, she knelt before my grandpa. Without him, I wouldn't have had such a wonderful upbringing, she acknowledged. Despite his protests, my parents insisted on taking care of him and urged us to live together as one family. Eventually, we moved in with my parents, but the adjustment wasn't easy, as we had spent more time apart than together. Eventually, my parents arranged for a separate house for my grandpa and me next to theirs, allowing us to live comfortably while still being close to family. After work, we would gather for dinner and watch TV together, just like any other family. After I got married, my parents invited my grandpa to live with us, and we seamlessly merged into one big family. Meanwhile, my parents pursued legal action against the orphanage director, adamant that they couldn't forgive her. During the proceedings, I met my husband, who was working as a prosecutor on the case. He admired my grandpa's selflessness in raising a child who wasn't his own for nearly 2 decades. It made me reflect on whether I could have done the same in his shoes. I hold my grandpa in the highest regard and wish him a long and healthy life. Thank you all for listening to my story. Your support and comments mean a lot to me. Wishing you all a day filled with happiness and good fortune.